Hello, everyone. Donna, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Beautiful. Welcome to season 4, episode 11. I can't believe we've come that far of CASA Group's Association Leadership Series. Today, I am joined by Donna Berger, who is a partner at the law firm of Becker. And so, Donna, welcome back.
I'm so happy to be here. Nice to be back, James.
Thank you. And I am James Donnelly, founder and now chairman of the CASA Group. And I was just talking to Donna earlier. It's my first webinar, I think, with glasses because I can't read my notes anymore. So that's how long we've been on here, Donna.
We've ruined your eyes during this series.
Yeah, I know. So I want to thank also my partner, Craig Vaughn, who's our CFO, who I think is listening today. They did a webinar last month on budgeting and reserves. And we are going to talk a bit about Senate Bill 154 today, but purposely not do the deep dive that they've done, because actually the feedback from that webinar is they'd like to even go deeper on the reserve question. But today's topic is navigating the new landscape, understanding the 2023 Community Association legislation in Florida. And Donna and I kind of talked about how to frame this, because I know we have lots of people in condominiums, lots in HOAs. And so we really think that the most value we can add today is some take-home value, some actionable steps that our audience, who are mostly board members, can take when they go back to their community. And we'll reference the law, but at the end of each section, we want to say, our recommendation is you go back with your board and do this. So in terms of format, you, our audience, are unbelievable. You sent some great questions in that have helped Don and I shape our discussion today. You can send Q&A in at any point. We're monitoring it. We may not answer your questions specifically, but we kind of group them together, and I'll pose those questions to Donna. If you want to watch this episode or any past episode, including Craig's last month, just go to casagroup.com. We do keep all the latest webinars on there, and by tonight, this one will also be on there. And a reminder, unless you're Donna's client, she's going to, of course, share her brilliance, but it is not legal advice to you guys. It's thoughts to ponder. And if you have any questions along the way, just email them to info@casagroup.com. The way the law, normally goes in each session is there's specific laws about condo and specific about HOA. I know we have some of both on here, but I do think the principles of both of them will apply. And in fact, the HOA world is really catching up, Donna, to the condo world. So I think it's relevant for everybody. And before we jump in, I wanted to ask you, Donna, I've been listening to some of your Take It to the Board podcasts, but admittedly missed your last one. Who was your guest? Because I think it's another avenue for our audience to learn more about not just association, but tangential topics. What was this last month?
So first of all, I want to say thank you for continuing to listen. You were my first guest, and that was 2.5 seasons ago. The last guest, James, was Dr. Jason Mansour. He's the chief of emergency medicine at Broward Health, and he came on to talk about this extreme heat we've been having and what Broward Health is seeing and what the signs and symptoms are of extreme heat exhaustion, heat stroke, how to prevent it, what to do once somebody starts experiencing it. And I spent some time on that episode talking about boards and the different rules you may want to relax or new rules you may want to implement to help your residents deal with extreme heat.
I think that's important. The heat has been unbelievable. That's why I spent some of my summer in Canada. But honestly, we're going to talk about it as one of our takeaways today about revisiting our rules. Sometimes we put rules in the books and we don't keep updating them, but you had some great examples of rules maybe should be adjusted because of heat, pool rules and whatnot. Okay, I want to pop up poll question 1. Ness, because I think it's helpful for Donna and myself and for our audience to see who our audience is. And so we're just asking you whether you live in a condo, HOA, or co-op, and then we'll share that information with you in a moment. But while that's populating, Don, I want to jump right in. There was a bill passed, House Bill 919. It was affectionately called, I think, the Homeowners Bill of Rights. Let's start with that one. The first thing that popped up to me, and it was an example of the HOA following the condo law, was the requirement to post a full agenda for a meeting. So let's start with that. Why is that put in place, and what does it mean to our audience?
So this bill, James, came about as a result of a huge HOA fraud case in Miami-Dade. And the legislator in that district said, I got to do something. And HB 919 was the result of that large case where there was fraud and there were hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million lost. And so we're going to talk about this. The starting point, as you said, was board meeting notice. Now, why was this implemented? The change was, now, in addition to just posting notice, you must specifically identify an agenda items for that meeting. And I think the reason behind it is because a lot of people weren't told when there were going to be meetings, or if they were, there was no agenda. So the thought was maybe they're sneaking in things that are really important to the residents, and the residents don't know about it. I will tell you personally, my HOAs were already posting agenda items for their meetings. And the law as it stood prior to 919, it always required that notices be posted 48 hours in advance in a conspicuous place. If you can't do that, then an alternative is to hand deliver or mail notice to your members. Or another option is if you have more than 100 residents, you can post notice on a broadcast TV.
So I've already had a question pop up. What is full agenda? Maybe just, I'm a manager or a board member and I want to post my agenda. Maybe just add a little color for what full agenda means.
So typically and by the way, look in your bylaws and your articles, because sometimes your bylaws and articles, they actually define an agenda, a set agenda that you must have for every board meeting. I've seen that in older documents. So typically it's a call to order, confirm that you have a quorum of directors if we're talking about a board meeting, and then you get right into it. And maybe you're talking about a change in rules. Maybe you're talking about a contract you want to sign. And then it would be, sometimes people do new business and old business. But if you're going to do those agenda items, my personal recommendation is you define what that is, unless you want to have a really long open-ended meeting. And then it's adjournment.
Excellent. Ness, share question one. We have a really nice split of our audience today. So it's a good thing we're going back and forth between condo and HOA and a little bit of co-op as well. You mentioned notifying, and one of the other changes in 919 in the HOAs was the requirement for email addresses. Maybe explain that one as well, Donna.
So 919 now adds the word designated to the owner's mailing address on the owner roster. And it includes email addresses in the official records that you must disclose to people. So if somebody has consented to receiving official association notices, James, by electronic transmission, and by that we mean email, it's part of the roster, it's added to the roster. But the big change has been that an owner's designated mailing address is the owner's property address, typically, unless the owner sends written notice saying, I want this to be my designated email address. Okay, so two things. An owner's designated mailing address is the owner's property address, unless the owner sends written notice to the association requesting that a different mailing address be used. And they can do the same thing with email. They can designate an email and say, this is the email that I want to be used on the roster.
Excellent. By the way, a couple of questions popped in. I don't want to leave the topic before we get them, but what if an agenda item comes up between the time you post and the time of the meeting? How do how do you get that topic on the agenda?
Well, it depends. No, again, remember, you typically have 48-hour notice to post in a conspicuous location. So sometimes people have enough, they've posted well before that, which means they have time to now revise the agenda and post again, as long as they meet that 48-hour notice. Otherwise, when you say agenda items, there is some flexibility. For instance, if you have new business, an old business, and maybe you don't define it, then there may be agenda items that come up under those catch-all categories.
And what about committees? Do I have to post a committee agenda?
You have to, so we've talked about this before. When it is a committee, a budget committee or a committee that can take final action, those notices have to be posted, those meetings have to be open. Now, there may be an exception under the governing documents for other type of meetings, committee meetings that can be closed, but still those committee meetings, they should be noticed. But they would be noticed, but they wouldn't be open. So they would be people would be notified that a closed meeting is taking place. But again,
Right.
This is going to talk to your counsel about whether or not you can close a particular committee meeting, whether or not it is a committee that falls within the categories I just discussed. Is it a budget committee? Is it and I'm talking about condos in this case, or is it a committee that can take final action without board? For instance, that's a finding or grievance committee, James.
Okay, boy, we've hit a good topic here. I don't think I can get to all the questions, but let's keep going because 919 has a lot of meat to it. And another area that has changed is as it relates to deposits. There's a number of reasons why associations can take deposits. And some of the bigger deposits, although are construction related or architecturally related, some are rental related, but what has changed in the law around deposits?
Now, this change in the law, James, was a head scratcher for me because it was so poorly worded. Like you just said, there are common area security deposits for tenants. There are move-in, move-out deposits that we see in our multifamily buildings. There are construction deposits. We see those in both our HOAs and we see it in our condominiums. Now, remember, this section is the homeowners. This is changing 720. So we're talking about HOAs here. But the language basically said that a deposit, if you take one, let's say you take one for the use of the clubhouse, or you take one for construction, you have to maintain it separately. It may not be commingled with other association funds, which I think most associations were already doing that. The big change is that if an owner wants an accounting, they may demand an accounting, and within 7 days after receiving the owner's written request for that accounting, the association must produce it. Now, I believe they didn't specify this, but I believe email is going to count as a written request for that accounting. And the reason I say that is because we've already seen the division take the position that an emailed request to inspect documents counts as a written request. So I have no reason to believe that the division is going to take a different approach here. So think about that. If you get a request by email, talk to counsel, but I believe you still have that same 7 days to produce the accounting. The problem I see with that, James, is some people listening, I see we've got almost 400 people listening. You may have somebody in the community who, how do I say this, is maybe a recreational complainer, maybe doesn't agree with you on everything. And those folks sometimes seem to pick the most inopportune moment to strike. So, we just had Hurricane Ian. The folks on the Southwest Florida are still contending with that. And I will tell you, in some cases, we had people making document inspection requests 2 days after the storm hit, knowing that there was a deadline under the statute. I see the same thing happening here. Lastly, with deposits, any unused deposit must be returned within 30 days after receiving notice that the construction project's complete or the move out is complete or whatever the purpose was for which the deposit was taken.
Nance, put up question 2. I want to see how many of our communities are taking deposits. And Donna, a couple of people have asked whether a homeowner under 919 is required to provide their email address.
They're not. That's a great question, but they're not required to provide their email address. But I do want to point out, James, that a lot of HOAs have 2 buckets of emails. So they have a bucket filled with emails that they've just gotten because people have emailed in questions, or they've signed forms and they've included their email. That bucket of emails does not constitute official consent to receiving notices electronically. And then they got the other bucket of emails where people have said, this is the email address I want to use to receive official association notices. So just be careful that you don't confuse what's in each bucket. And then the only other thing I'll say quickly, because I know this is all about practical tips, is for our board members listening, please always remember to blind copy when you're using those official association email addresses. When you're sending out notices, if you list everybody's email address on the to line, I get this all the time, James. People complain about, I just talked about maybe the resident naysayer. They're sending emails to everybody. And my first question is, how'd they get everybody's email address? And it's normally because an email went out showing everyone's email. So blind copy.
We have all done that before, but it is a terrible practice or mistake. Okay, let's share the deposit survey results, please, Ness. It looks like less than I thought, Donna. And from a management point of view, I will just tell you the 7 days to provide accounting, like most self-managed or managed communities, we do monthly accounting. So it's a ridiculous requirement that got into that bill, but it is what it is. We shall deal with it. Okay, keeping going. This is good, Donna. There were a number of other items, and I don't know what, I know you've got some notes there in 919. There was some information on kickbacks, information on removal of board directors and conflict of interest. I'll let you kind of respond to that one as you see fit, but I think this is better defined law than existed before on these topics.
It was already the case, James, that an officer or director who was engaging in fraud or self-dealing would be removed. 919 just expands on this. I will just say they added, instead of good, they changed the word good to an officer or director who accepts anything or service of value. So they swapped out the word good for thing for good, who knowingly solicits, offers to accept, or accepts anything or service of value or kickback for which consideration has not been provided. That language actually really intrigued me. So if you provide consideration for a kickback, you're okay? Just the way it was drafted made no sense to me. For his or her benefit or that of his or her immediate family, from any person providing or proposing to provide goods or services to the association is subject to monetary damages under Chapter 617. Now, the reference to 617 under the General Not-for-Profit Corporate Act, which is 617, that section that they refer in 919 generally limits the personal liability of directors and officers of nonprofit groups unless they breach their fiduciary duty. So do you want to know what the grounds for immediate removal are?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Grounds for immediate removal include forgery of a ballot envelope or voting certificate, theft or embezzlement of the association funds or property, destruction of official records or refusal to allow the inspection or copying of official records in furtherance of a crime. So it has to be that you're obstructing the inspection because you've committed a crime and you're trying to cover it up, or obstruction of justice pursuant to Chapter 843. Which is the obstruction of justice statute.
This is really interesting, and I know there's a lot, we're always trying to figure out what level of detail to go down into, but two people have asked the question, where do we get to look at these bills, and is there a summary somewhere? And I just want to stop before I forget. I mean, you can go to the Florida legislative website, and all these bills are in detail. But I know most law firms, including Becker, you could probably go to the Becker website and get summaries of a lot of this legislation. So there are a lot of resources. If you want the legal side, you can go to the state.
I would just put website. This up there. It's flsenate.gov. And
FL Senate.
On the top is you're going to click and it'll say bill number, and you will put in 919 and you'll click it, and it'll be 2023 session. And then you're going to see a listing. And you're going to want to go on the top where it says bill text, and you're going to want to click bill text, and then you want to go to the version of the bill, which is the enrolled version of the bill. Because remember, these bills go through a lot of different iterations as they wind through the committee process. So that's the way to get it, folks. Go to flsenate.gov. By the way, it doesn't have to just be a Senate bill. You can find House bills on that website as well. So you'll type in HB whatever, as SB whatever, go to the bill text, go to the ER version of it, and then you'll have, if you have insomnia, I highly recommend you do this.
All right. One more on this bill. There was some tightening up of the rules around fining. And is there anything in there that you think we should dive into at all, Donna?
Only to the extent that it says that the notice of the fining committee hearing, after the board decides to fine, then you have to let the violator know that he or she has an opportunity to attend a fining committee hearing. That notice must include a description of the alleged violation, the specific action to cure the violation if that's applicable, and the date and location of the hearing. 919 James added language that owners may attend the hearing by phone or by Zoom or other electronic means. So I know in some communities, they insisted that people show up personally. That is now changed. So a practical takeaway is review your protocol. If you've been using, or your management company has been using notices that don't define what the violation is and all that other information I just said, you need to change that. If we have a moment, James, I would love to tell you the one part of 919 that shocked me.
I think this would be a great time, Donna, to hit that item.
Okay, so the one thing that shocked me about this, and it is a due process issue, is that 919 contains language that says, if a criminal charge is pending against an officer or director, he or she may not be appointed or elected to a position as an officer or director in any other association. So not that association, we already know that they've been removed from that association, but we have people in Florida who live in multiple associations or have units in multiple associations. And it goes on to say that that person who, if there's a criminal charge pending, remember, there's been no conviction, but just a criminal charge pending, is not entitled to have access to the official records of any association except pursuant to court order. So my question is, we have people who may own a commercial unit in another building, but live in an HOA, and under 919, if they've been charged, if there's a criminal charge pending, they're not entitled to see the official records in their commercial condo. That's significant, and I think it's a real due process issue.
I didn't notice that. That's probably why you're the lawyer and I'm not, but I did notice that you didn't have to be convicted, which is interesting. It's just charged. Okay. So I want to wrap up 919. There's one question. Does this just apply to HOAs? Yes, this is an HOA law. And in terms of takeaways, Donna, the agenda is a big thing. If you're not already doing it, do it. It's not effective till October 1, but there's no reason to wait. We've told our managers of HOAs, start the best practice. 2, the inclusion of emails, not mandatory, but sufficient in terms of communicating. And then I really think, and we're stressing this at Castle, we're going to have to take a look at what our policies and procedures are at each HOA in this case on deposit taking and fining. Like, the process has been tweaked and we have to adjust. This is big take home value. Take a look at what we are doing in our association and make sure it's still compliant.
Also, we didn't get into the fraudulent voting activities, which is significant under 919. I mean, they go into, James, the following activities constitute a misdemeanor in the first degree, and then they go into all these different scenarios where you could be bullying someone or coercing somebody when it comes to their vote. You could be obstructing them. Interestingly enough, it says that you can't promise directly or indirectly anything of value to buy the vote of that person. Interestingly enough, they say, but that excludes wearing an item at an election rally or food at an election rally. It's not really a good fit with the association lifestyle. I don't know what they're talking about at an election rally And I don't know, but I guess people can walk around wearing t-shirts for their favorite candidate. But I think this, when you're talking about practical takeaways, James, I think this law in HOAs requires some creation of election policy and protocol. And I think if you don't have that, you should get with council and your management team and talk about your campaigning. And this may also impact people, electioneering. If a board tries to send out information about what they've done, like, hey, vote for us again, get with council. That may or may not be impacted by this.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Donna. We're going to move to 154, which is the Surfside glitch bill. Ness, let's put up question 3. I'd be interested to see for our condo boards whether they have contracted for or begun the milestone inspections. Donna, we've kind of agreed we're not doing a deep dive into this. I think what we did agree was this moved it forward, but there still remains quite a bit of clarifying. This won't be the last glitch bill we have on this legislation. But a couple of things I wanted to highlight. One was they pushed to the local authority certain elements of implementing this law, including, interestingly, that the local authority needs to notify the condominium that they're subject to this law. And we've already had some questions coming in saying, well, then I don't need to figure it out on my own. I'll wait for a notice, which I can see you shaking your head. So maybe just comment on what obligations we have as condominiums to comply and know that we have to comply.
So I will tell you, prior to SB 4D, which was the bill that this 154 attempted to clarify, we had Broward and Miami-Dade who had their own certification programs, the only 2 counties out of 67 in Florida that did. And I saw communities, James, that were age 44, 45, that hadn't done a certification in Broward or Miami-Dade, and their answer was, well, we never got contacted because they slipped through the cracks. You still have statutory deadlines. So even though in 154, there was a bit of a punting from the state to local authority to take a more active role, sitting around and waiting for this is not the answer. You do have the statutory deadlines, 2024 for most buildings. You are going to want to be proactive here. You're going to want to be vetting and contracting with your engineers, with your reserve specialists, but don't sit around and wait for the local authority. When the local authority does contact you, you have an obligation to provide that notice to your residents to let them know that the local authority has reached out and you've got a deadline to commence the milestone inspection. So that's the basic point. I did want to add one other thing though on 154. I know we're not doing a deep dive, but a lot of our boards are getting significant pushback on their budgets because their budgets have gone up exponentially thanks to insurance premiums. A huge gift that 154 gave was the fact that insurance premiums are now excluded from that calculation of the 115% increase from last year's budget. So just be mindful of that.
Interesting. There's a couple of questions here I wanted to share. One is, does 154 only affect condominiums, or what if I have a HOA that's got a 3 or 4 story, common element? Would it apply to that?
So it affects condos and co-ops, what we call threshold buildings, which are residential buildings 3 stories or higher. There may very well be HOAs that have, I don't know if a clubhouse is not really a residential building, but you do have people in the clubhouse, right? You've got people, and if that's a very high clubhouse, I would think that it would. That's an engineering question to ask as to whether or not that structure, if it is considered a threshold building and you've got people in it. I know we've had local building officials red tag clubhouses, James, if they've been unsafe for occupancy. But the other thing to think about in an HOA is that you also have HOAs that are operating a lot of sub-associations and overseeing them. So there are HOAs that need to be mindful of the milestone inspection and the reserve study requirements, because the master association may have obligations to ensure that their condominium sub-associations are fulfilling these obligations.
Well, you know, it brings back a point, and I really think everyone in our audience, I know we try and keep professional fees down, but if I'm on the board, because part of 154 increases the liability to board members for non-compliance, I'm getting an opinion from my attorney saying I do or I don't have to comply. I really, that's a takeaway for this one. It's just too big an issue to not get third-party, qualified advice. I do want to come back though to the local authority, because 154 also allows the local authorities to extend the deadline if there's circumstances that support that. And they also have punted to the local authority. You may have just done a huge inspection on your building in the last 24, 36 months, and you may be able to use that, but that's based on the approval of the local authority. So I really think that this is a substantial change in 4D by moving a responsibility to the local authority, and probably appropriate. I mean, everything else about building code is done locally. So I think that's a good move, but I think it's a significant one in 154.
Let me just add this though, because I'm hearing from a lot of clients who, now that they've heard that the local authority may grant an extension, because right now, phase 1 of the milestone must be completed within 180 days after receiving notice from the local authority. That's not a lot of time. So phase 1 of the milestone must be completed within 180 days after receiving notice from the local authority. If phase 2 is needed because the visual inspection has revealed significant or substantial structural defects or weaknesses, then within 180 days after submitting the phase 1, they have to have a timeline for completion of phase 2. So what I'm getting asked a lot is, okay, well, we'll just ask for a hardship extension, correct? And the problem with that is that it's not going to be good enough just to say, we don't have the money, this is a financial hardship on our people. Everybody's going to say that. The local authorities may grant an extension, but it's going to be based on your good faith efforts of what you're doing. So you've hired your engineer, okay, but they're backed up, they can't get to it. You've hired your reserve specialist and it's underway. Those people maybe have an opportunity to get an extension because they're already taking the responsible steps to comply. But there are factors outside their control that are forcing them to perhaps miss a deadline. But simply saying that we can't afford this, I will tell our listeners, I do not believe that the local authority, they would be inundated. Everybody would say that.
I forgot to ask Ness to share the results of who started their milestone inspection. So please do that now, Ness. Yeah, I think the one other point I want to talk about that, it still is the 3-story rule. So if it's less than 3 stories, you're not required. But there was this 3-mile rule that was eliminated and put back, that the local authority will decide whether salt is a relevant factor. And it's probably good they did that because there were so many questions about where 3 miles starts and stops. So, okay, let's keep going. In terms of the reserves, lots of questions. And the only thing I really wanted to get some comment on, Donna, is there's a lot of confusion between what they call paragraph G reserves, which are the ones driven by this law, and then our reserves we've had forever and a day. There's not a lot of change to the reserves that are required by old law. I'll stop with that because you can still waive those reserves like you could before with a vote of the owners. But comment on what, if any, has changed as it relates to the reserve items that were not included in 4D.
So 154 did answer some significant questions about reserves. The first thing was our lower buildings were all freaking out that they were going to have mandatory reserves. So they can still waive reserves, but they did increase the threshold for waiving reserves from a majority of a quorum, which it used to be a majority of those owners present and voting to waive or partially fund at a meeting for which a quorum has been established. That threshold has now been increased to a majority of the total. Do I think in our lower buildings they're going to achieve that? Absolutely, they're going to achieve that. But just know it's a higher threshold. So the takeaway, our practical takeaway, is make sure you understand that you have a higher threshold to achieve. Now, the subsection G, or the structural components, still not waivable, and that includes, the structure, the windows, if the association maintains windows, the waterproofing and painting, the roof, electrical, plumbing, support columns. Those are still in there. Those are still the subsection G components. One significant change is that when you're conducting the structural integrity reserve study, which we use the acronym SIRS, you can now have a reserve specialist perform the visual portion of that study. Previously, you needed an architect or an engineer, and 154 did address supply and demand issues. They did that with the milestone inspection too, because now a team can do the milestone phase 1 as long as they have an engineer, a licensed engineer or a licensed architect overseeing it. There are other things we don't have time to talk about in terms of special inspectors and other, credentialed individuals. That's for another episode. So did I answer your question? So another thing I would say is you can't waive subsection G. You can't pool it with waivable components. So you're not going to want to put your subsection G, your structural components, your structural reserve components in a pooled account with, let's say, lobby furniture or, elevators. Or you've got to work with not only your reserve specialist, but you've got to work with your engineer to figure out where there's overlap. And like, for instance, in some communities, the seawall is a subsection G component, depending on where it's located and how close it is to the structural building. In other buildings, it may not be. This is an engineering question.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that we had on the board. I was going to ask, if it's not in Schedule G, is it included? And I guess the answer is no, but there's fairly broad interpretation of paragraph G. The other, I'm glad you brought up that they widened the group of people who can do the work, because we are going to have a problem with getting enough professionals doing this much work. That's why a takeaway for our audience is go, don't wait, go. And I think we had another question on here is, isn't every engineer going to say, okay, phase 1 requires a phase 2 because it's more work for the engineer? But I actually think these engineering firms are going to be so inundated, they won't be incented by more work. They're going to they're going to legitimately look at the structure and make an opinion.
But this, I agree. And if you have properly vetted your engineering firm, and hopefully you're working with a reputable, honorable firm, they're not inclined to do that. But I will say what I'm hearing on the street and from a handful of clients is, hey, our members are pushing us to get a different engineering report. So they're almost opinion shopping. Look, if you think that your initial report lacks something, then that you do what's called a peer review and you would get another report. But remember, these milestone inspections go directly to the local building official. In the past, remember, just for Broward and Miami-Dade with their certification programs, the engineers would send the reports to the board. And unfortunately, in some cases, boards did nothing with those reports, or they sat on them for a long time. That's no longer the case. So if you've already got your report that you commissioned is already off to the local building official, your owners who are pushing you to get another report that maybe is a little more anemic, I can tell you that the local building officials are not going to have a robust report and an anemic report and go, okay, you know what, we're going to let you, go with the anemic report. And frankly, it should be in the boards and residents. Their priority should be to have the most robust engineering study out there.
There's so many questions, Donna. There's absolutely no way we're going to be able to get to them, but a couple things that just have come up. I may be able to answer this way. DBPR has now put up an FAQ link on their website. It's admittedly inadequate right now, but I think the more questions that get put to them, they will expand it. And maybe, Ness, we can put the link for that DBPR up when we post the webinar tonight.
So one other resource, James, I'm glad you mentioned that. By the end of this year, by December 31st, December 31st, 2024, the Florida Building Commission has now been required to adopt rules to establish a building safety program. So be on the lookout for those rules, because hopefully that's going to help volunteer boards also figure out what they need to be doing.
Yeah. Okay. This is great. So let me, I want a couple more legislative changes I want to move on to, but I think in terms of takeaways on this topic, there's so many questions. Does this include, does that include, do I have to, don't I have to? I mean, it is condos and co-ops, it is residential, it is 3 stories. It doesn't preclude old reserves. There's just a new requirement for what they call paragraph G reserves. We do not believe the timeframes are going to change. There may be an exception honored by or offered by a local authority, but highly unlikely. So I really think I'm a condo board member. We need to hire an engineer, get our attorney, and start this ball rolling, because of course we're getting the questions, does this apply to my association? And Donna, you and I don't know enough to answer that question, but I really think advice is important. So here's what I wrote for takeaways. First of all, determine if you're subject to this law or not, and that's a legal question. 2, implement it now, don't wait. 3, engage the local building authority. They are going to be the ones that are effectively administering this, and for the most part, you're going to get their attention now. You're not going to get their attention near the deadline because they're going to be too crazy. And these reports, all the reports have to be, and we didn't mention this, Donna, delivered to the owners. So, but we'll get to that one when we get these reports coming out. I also, though, you brought up a couple of excellent things yesterday, and I wanted to share. Both 919 and 154 are putting increased responsibility on our boards of directors, who are our 400 people on here right now. I really want to make sure you boards take another look at your D&O policy. We're not suggesting there's any risk here that can't be managed, and we encourage you to stay on the board and get more people to join you. But the other one you brought up that I hadn't thought about was there's about to be more cash in our condo and co-ops because you have to reserve, which means you have to take another look at your fidelity bond. Maybe, Donna, what's the requirement for fidelity bond, and why should we be relooking at it now?
So fidelity bonding is required for anybody who is going to control or disperse association funds. And so I'm often asked, what does that mean? How much? It means the total amount, the maximum amount of funds available in all your accounts, operating and reserve, at any one time, that if you had a fraudster in your midst, he or she could have access to those funds. And as you said, James, we are looking, starting in 2025 and forward, millions of dollars more in these reserve accounts throughout Florida. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you knew this, the first condo ombudsman was against reserve funding because he thought it would, be too much of a temptation for boards or other people who had access. And, obviously we've come a long way since then, but it is a great idea to go. It's necessary. You're going to need checks and balances in place with all this extra money. I did want to mention one other thing, because we talked about it yesterday, ELSS. I know a lot of these buildings that are now contending with milestone inspections. Part of the subsection G involves fire safety equipment.
Yeah, ELSS is Emergency Life Safety Systems, and I did have that a little later, but since you brought it up, it looked to me like the ever delaying deadlines for that may have been adjusted again, thanks to our CFO of the state. Any comment for our audience on deadlines for ELSS?
So this one is still in flux, James. So CFO Jimmy Petronas several months ago prepared and accepted an amendment to the building code, which extends the installation for the engineered life safety system to 2027. That's the new deadline. However, the statute 718 was never changed. So the statute still refers to the 2024 end of year deadline, but that statute also refers to the building code. So we've got what may be a very clever end run to give more time. What I will tell you, what I'm seeing is that the associations who are still impacted, they're going ahead. They're still doing it because they have other repairs to make now because of the milestone inspection, and they've collected the money given that the deadline was, right around the corner. So they're still doing it. I do think there is a minimal risk, minimal if you wait, but this is one where I would suggest reaching out to your local legislator, getting the legal opinion, reaching out to your local fire marshal to confirm that you have an extension. I wouldn't just wing it.
Okay. All right, Ness, let's put up question 4. I want to talk briefly a bit about insurance in 2 aspects, Donna. One, the laws that were passed, I think, were good in terms of long-term impact on insurance rates, but they're not affecting short-term impact on interest rates. But we have, we're asking our audience right now. Oh, no, that's question 4. That's fidelity bond. Sorry. Question 5 is my insurance question, but this is a good one anyways. Look at that. Only 24% of our, share it. Thanks, Ness. 24% of our audience have relooked at their fidelity bond lately. And that, by the way, that's not a surprise. It's not something you often do. And really it's the insurance agent's, responsibility to make sure that they're making good recommendations. All that to say, our takeaway from today is, I think in light of 154 and 4D, we should really take another look at that.
100%.
But Ness, put up question 5. Just wanted to get some feedback on insurance. So in terms of takeaways for insurance, Donna, a lot of the what drives insurance costs are the litigation claim activity and the cost of reinsurance. Those are the 2 big drivers. I really think 2A, 2B, 2D did a good job of tightening up the litigation side of it. There may be some litigation attorneys that aren't happy about that, but I think it was good for insurance costs. What we haven't done, even though I think it was 2B tried to address it, was address the reinsurance. And I think we're going to be asking this audience this year for the legislative session, we need a larger solution. I think they put up $1 billion or $2 billion in the reinsurance market. That's literally not a drop in the bucket. We need the state to somehow guarantee or use the CAT fund to back reinsurance markets so that the reinsurance markets come down. So that's going to be a future ask. But was there anything in the legislation, I know you had a quick look at the 2s, I call them, the insurance legislation, that you thought we should highlight for today for our boards, Donna?
Yeah, I do. They have really shortened up the time, James, for people to bring claims. And look, they would have you believe that most of the problems relate to my profession, the legal profession. And while there have been fraudulent insurance claims, there have been frivolous litigation, the response, again, it's always like a knee-jerk reaction. Now they've really made it difficult for people who have claims to pursue them and to be made whole. And that's a problem. People pay millions and millions of dollars for insurance coverage over the lifespan of these buildings. And you want to get the value of what you're paying for, don't you? So let me tell you, assignment of benefits contracts are no longer allowed. A lot of clients love that because they would sign that contract and it was, not their problem. My colleagues and I were never a fan of that because there are significant disadvantages. But some of the huge problems, they removed the one-way attorney's fee provision, which allows a policyholder to recover attorney's fees and claims against insurers. Why would they do that? Because they want to make it uncomfortable for you to pursue your legal rights. That's a problem. They shorten the time the insurer must acknowledge claims from 14 days to 7. and requires the claim to be paid or denied within 60 days. I actually like that one if they're going to pay you, because it means you get paid quicker. But they shorten the time to file or reopen a claim from 2 years to 1 year, and shorten the time for supplemental claims for 3 years to 18 months. And you know what that does? It's like if you have an accident and you don't know immediately after the accident, you feel kind of okay. And then a couple months later, you feel really not okay. And you find out there was more damage from that accident than your personal accident than you thought. They've kind of adopted the same philosophy here by not allowing you to file supplemental claims from 3 years to 18 months. There was a reason they allowed 3 years for that, because sometimes it takes time for the damage to be revealed. These are what we call latent impacts. They're not patent, they're not readily observable. Insurers may require you to go to mandatory binding arbitration. That's in their best interest. Normally, it's better for the policyholder to go to court and have your day in court. And now bad faith claims require an adverse adjudication before you can bring them. So I want you to just understand that. Bad faith means we paid for this insurance policy. It's a contract, and our insurer is referring to honor the terms of the contract. You used to just bring the bad faith claim and that was it. Now you actually have to go to court before you can go to court and get a ruling that there was bad faith. So all of these are designed to do what we also see with 558 claims, if we're going to talk about 360, which is, pump the brakes on your legal rights, make it harder for you to pursue them.
Interesting. Let's share question 5. I see I have a typo in there, Donna, or Ness. It was 25 to 50%, but I think our audience figured it out. But look at those increases, Donna. It's absolutely crazy. I was talking to Craig Vaughn, our CFO, about what we can do to help our clients. And, one thing to look at, and you and I talked about this, Dawn, is, how much risk does the board want to take on to lower premiums? The classic example would be to increase deductible. And Craig's comment was it was disappointing how little it changed the premium to take on that risk, but it is something we should look at. And the other one you've mentioned many times during our hurricane discussions is all the mitigation steps to make sure your building is insurable. We have, some of our older properties, and the insurance companies are coming in and said, we're not going to cover if you don't redo your roof. So I think certainly this is maybe going to marry up a bit with our additional reserve money and actually do some of that work early rather than late. And then what can we do going forward? I really think we're going to have one more kick at legislation this year to address the reinsurance market. And that's really, there's no take home for that today, but we may be calling on this audience to support that kind of legislation going forward.
Actually, has one quick take home. Your legislators are home right now. They're in their district offices. They're all, dare I say, they're sitting ducks. So make your appointment and go speak to him or her, especially if you're a large community. You have what they want, which is votes. So go knock on their doors, make the calls, get to them now before they leave. I mean, committee weeks typically start, I think this year they may even start in August or September, but now's the time you want to reach out so they know your face. They know your community. They put them so they know when they're looking at these insurance proposals, they know the real human impact of what they're discussing. I can't emphasize this enough that, being proactive and reaching out to your legislators and letting them know how this is hurting your community, it does move the needle a little bit.
Good. Okay. So, Norm, we're running out of time. There's 2 more laws I wanted you to talk about. HB 437 is often talked about the flag laws, and I think the flag part is less significant than the fact that you're not allowed to impose rules on storage or items not visible from the front of the home. And I have 2 questions for this. I mean, a lot of we're in lake communities. You could have the ugliest backyard ever, and your neighbor across the back would have to look at that. And 2, I think we're going to have to relook at our covenant enforcement rules as communities. Comments on 437?
Yeah, and that changed section 720.3045. So I'm gonna read it to you. It allows the installation, display, and storage of any item on a parcel, any item that is not visible from the frontage or from an adjacent parcel, including but not limited to artificial turf, boats, flags, and RVs. So many of our HOAs, they don't want sheds. They don't want your big boat on the trailer parked anywhere where people can see them. And there's an obvious reason for this. People buy in HOAs first, they want things looking nice. As you indicated, there's a problem. What's an adjacent owner? Okay, what's the frontage? What constitutes the frontage? I wish our legislators, when they would draft these things, would be clearer. I think this is going to be a huge problem. If you're a golf course community, I live in a golf course community, you don't want it looking like a train wreck in the backyard. But according to this, if it's not visible from the frontage or an adjacent parcel owner, it's just visible from the golf course, I'm okay. The thing I'd say about flags we're going to have an issue with, particularly coming up in election season, or maybe even outside of it, is it's added a bunch of first responder flags. I don't even think many of these people even have flags, but it also allows, it's going to allow the thin blue flag for law enforcement, which is fine. And a lot of people like that flag, but I think you're going to have some flag wars in some communities.
Okay, last one, 837, it's called civil remedies, but what was interesting for all our condos and HOAs, it basically gave the association some protection if they took certain steps in terms of camera, access control, training for employees. We're looking at this closely because we got to make sure our teams are trained. It's not a requirement to do these things, but it does limit potential liability to the association if something happens on your property. You get the last word on that one, then we're going to do our wrap-up takeaways.
So the law says substantial compliance, which we're meaning to think 5 out of 7 of the bullet points. Speak with counsel on this. Some of these things won't be applicable, like a 1-inch deadbolt. Most associations have this, a peephole, unless you have a window. I think this was really designed with rental buildings in mind, James. But I would say this is a good idea to always do a security review in your community and see how you can upgrade it. It's absolutely necessary if you have had a recent security incident, because liability is tied to what? Foreseeability. So if it's happened before, it might happen again. We have a pretty active car theft ring going on right now in Broward County. I think it might even be in Miami-Dade. So it is a good bill. Again, this is the takeaway is review your policies and your protocols when it comes to security. If you have a third-party vendor, a security vendor, talk to that vendor. You may even want to amend your agreement with that vendor to include the training requirement.
Excellent. Okay, look at that, 1 o'clock. Here's what I wrote down, Donna, and for my very hardworking audience. HOAs, you got to start posting your agenda. Really, it's time now to determine the applicability of SB 154, the Surfside legislation. Don't wait. Get your requirements clear now so you can come up with a plan. I really think, Donna, there's enough change in here that we should be doing a review of governing documents or even a rules audit to really make sure with all of this change that our policies are consistent. Review your D&O insurance, review your fidelity bond that we talked about, review covenant enforcement criteria. We may not be able to enforce certain rules we used to because of 437. Review your security deposit. This one I think is going to get a lot of attention, Donna. Is your association's policies around security deposits now consistent with the new law? And then finally, I wrote down, it's probably a good idea to do a security review based on the opportunity to limit some liability. So our goal here today, folks, was to try and take what can be very technical, a lawyer-only law, and put it into what should you as a board be considering doing at your next board meeting after you post the agenda. So Donna, what did I miss? Did we capture our takeaways for the day?
Yeah, I think we hit our goal. I would add this, James, to our people listening. It's never been more important that you properly vet the professional advisors you're going to rely on, given the enhanced personal liability you as board members have under these laws. So That means when you're looking at your engineers, when you're looking at your reserve companies, when you're looking at your management professionals, your attorney team, all of that, it's going to be incredibly important that you vet these people on something more than just what the pricing is. I know this has been this has been kind of the litmus test for decades of how much do these people cost. You're going to want to know that the people surrounding you, the professional advisors you hire, they're your safety net. So you're going to want to make sure they know what they're talking about and they have the skills you need to meet your statutory obligations. So that's my little
Excellent.
speech.
Donna, wow, thank you. 100 miles an hour again. Donna's email is on the board there, as is info@castlegroup.com. Our marketing department will have this recording up by the end of day today. Our next episode is September 20th, 12 o'clock. Really grateful for this audience, all you do in your communities, and to come and listen to Donna and myself. So thank you for what you do. Have a good rest of the summer. Donna, same to you. I hope you get some rest, and we'll see you all on September 20th. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks, James.